hope y'all are doing well this morning. If you've got your Bibles, open them up to Mark chapter 5. We're continuing on our summer run through the book of Mark, looking at all the things that he wrote about the life of Jesus, the ministry of Jesus. And in the Mark chapter 5, we're gonna get into some very specific stories that I'm gonna kind of walk through each one of them. One of the things that I love the most about the job that I get to do, that God's called me to, is I get the opportunity to sit and visit with people in capacities that don't normally exist, because I get to hear people's entire background. And you might think that's too much. No, it's not too much. It's actually nice. I love it, because you begin to understand why people think the way they do, why they act the way they do, what perspective, what situations they're coming from. And I've just got to tell you, I wish that I could have an hour just with each person in this room, just to sit and visit about, what's your background? Who are your parents? How was your life growing up? What's your life now as you're working or as you're retired? Because you learn so much about people and what they do. And this morning in Mark chapter 5, as he's writing, we get three really incredible stories about Jesus and what he's doing and what he's doing in the lives of these people. And so I just kind of want to walk through those stories this morning. I want us to see something in each one of them that applies to us, that makes us kind of really think about who we are and what we can do with the stories that God's given us. And so this morning, if you've got your Bibles, open them up to Mark chapter 5. We're going to kind of walk through each one of these stories. And the first story that we come across in Mark chapter 5 is the story of this demon-possessed man. And we see him as Jesus has gone over the Lake of Galilee, he and his apostles and his disciples. And they've gone over and they just remember, we talked last week about this storm that came up and how they were all worried about the storm. And at the end of the day, Jesus calms the storm, and they were scared of the storm, and then they were scared of the power of Jesus. And so Jesus is dealing with all of that. And he comes up on this shoreline on the other side of the lake, he and his apostles. At this point, darkness has kind of fallen upon the shoreline. The shoreline is scattered with limestone caves. And these weren't just caves that were empty. These were caves that were used as burial tombs. There were dead people inside these caves. And so what they knew, because back in that day, it was very well known that you did not go out at night without a flashlight or some kind of a torch, or a flashlight, they didn't have batteries, without a torch of some kind, without a light of some kind, right? You didn't go out, and people are going, hey, he's not biblical today at all. You just didn't go out after dark, because it was an invitation for demons to get you. It was very, you didn't even spend the night in a house by yourself at night, because it was just an invitation. They were so scared of demons at this point in time. And so they come up on this shoreline, and it's a cemetery. It's riddled with caves full of dead bodies. And out of one of these caves, their greatest fear comes true. A demon-possessed man starts walking toward them. And so you've got to understand, during the daytime, this is probably a scary place. At this time, it's just downright frightening, and it's just terrifying. And so here they are, and this demon-possessed man starts to walk to them. And this is a demon-possessed man who lived in these caves. Like, he'd been kicked out of his own community. He couldn't be restrained anymore in his community. He couldn't be reasoned with. He was a danger not only to himself, but he was a danger to his family. He was a danger to the community around him. And people knew that he was out there. It's not like they didn't know. People knew that he was out there, and they didn't come to help him, ever. Nobody came to help him until Jesus shows up. And when Jesus shows up, it says that in the Bible that this man ran and he fell at the feet of Jesus. And he pleads with Jesus and asks him what he could possibly want with him. And I imagine people are going to read this story differently, and they'll kind of take their own spin on it. But I'm imagining this man who's pleading with Jesus cannot handle anything else at this point. If you read this story, when you read Mark, and go back and read it, the man answers for himself in one point, and then the demons answer for him in another point. And as I see it, and as I read it, and I might be completely wrong here, but I just think that this man can't handle anything else. And he pleads with Jesus, what do you want with me? And I got to feel like that at this point in his life, Any faith that he has had in God has been exhausted because of the torture that he's experienced. And he's just defeated. He can't handle anything else right now. And so that's why I asked the question. In my mind, that's why I asked the question, God, what do you want with Jesus? What do you want with me? And then Jesus responds and he asks his name. And now the man doesn't reply, but the demons reply. And they say, our name is Legion, for we are many. And then the demons beg Jesus not to send them out of the area. And not even to send them into the abyss. When you read this story in Luke, he adds that little nugget of information that the demons begged him not to send them out of the area, or not even to send them into the abyss where they would be completely useless. And so they request to be sent into this herd of pigs that's kind of around this area that they can see there. And so Jesus gives them permission to go into these pigs. And so the pigs are overcome with the demons. And they rushed down this steep embankment into the Lake of Galilee, and they were completely drowned. And so there were people there who were taking care of those pigs. And they see all of this unfold. And they quickly head back into the cities where all the rest of their people were, and they begin to tell the story of what's happening. You've got to come down here and see this. You've got to come see what's happening. We've lost all of our pigs. We've lost all kinds of stuff. And this man has come out, and he's dealing with this demon-possessed guy that's out there. You've got to come. And so the crowds are beginning to build. And they grew larger. And it turns out that after they got there, that the crowds were a lot more comfortable with a demon-possessed man just outside their community than they were with a man whose power they could not comprehend. And so they asked Jesus to leave. Think about that for just a moment. Jesus has healed a man. He's cost him a herd of pigs, but he's healed a man. And he's the one they're afraid of. He's the one they want to get rid of. Because they can't comprehend it. They can't deal with it. And so Jesus listens to the request. And he goes back to his boat, and as he's getting into his boat, the man who was demon-possessed comes up to the boat, and he's starting to get in, and he says, look, I want to go with you. And we don't know if he wants to go with him because he thinks maybe the demons will show back up in his life if Jesus is not there. Maybe he just wants to go with Jesus because it's the first time that somebody's felt compassion for him in a long time, and he wants to be with somebody that treated him that way. Maybe he just wants to join Jesus' ministry. But Jesus tells him, no, you're not going with me. He goes, I want you to stay here. He was from an area called the Decapolis, and it was an area that consisted of about 10 Greek cities. And he says, I want you to go back, and I want you to tell your story to them. And he's got an incredible story. He's got a story where he's going from captivity to being set free. That's a great story to tell. He's got a story of having experienced fear, and now all of a sudden he's experiencing peace. And what that looks like. He's got a tell. And he goes and he tells that story. You get further into the chapter and you see that there's another miracle in this chapter, and it involves a woman who's been sick for a very long time. Now, she's done everything that she knows how to do in order to find a cure. She has seen every medical person that she could talk to. She's tried every remedy that all of her ancestors had tried. She's done everything that she can. And now it only just seems that she's worse off than she was before. And she's defeated at best, and she's lost all hope at worst. However, she was probably part of the crowd that Jesus had been preaching to just the day before. And when he stood in that boat to kind of get away from the crowds, she heard something from him that made her ears perk up a little bit. She heard something from him that was worth listening to. She saw things from him that gave her hope that she had been missing for so long. And maybe she tried to get close to Jesus. But before she could get near enough to Jesus, he and the apostles got in the boat and they went to the other side of the lake. And just like that, the sickness kind of wins again. However, she's got a new morning, and with the new morning, it seems that Jesus and the apostles have shown back up. And so she's got another chance. And the crowds are beginning to build up around him already, and they're already beginning to ask Jesus for different things. As a matter of fact, there's a man that comes up to Jesus, and he's speaking with him and talking with him, and Jesus decides that he's gonna go with him to his house to help him with this situation. She has no idea what it is, but they begin this road to go to his house to deal with some different things, and she thinks to herself, this is my only shot. Like if he gets away now, I don't know that I'll ever see him again. I don't know if I'll ever be healed. I don't know if he has the ability to heal me or not, but it's the only shot I've got. And so I've got to get close to him. And so she begins to work her way through the crowds. And the crowds are dense at this moment. And she squeezes past one group of people only to be, headed off by another group of people that are all touching Jesus. And so she continues to kind of get that way. She's determined. She's determined. And she's so desperate to be healed and so sure of what she knows about Jesus from a distance, she thinks to herself, if I can just get close enough, just to touch an outer piece of his clothing. If I could just, what is the song? If I could just touch the hem of his garment. If I could just reach out there and touch him a little bit, I think that's all I need. And so she's fighting that fight. And that's where she's going. So it's this persistent struggle that she's working through the crowd. And now all of a sudden, Jesus is in reach. And with every bit of hurt and with every bit of faith, she reaches out and she touches the outer robe of Jesus. And the Bible tells us that she is immediately healed. She notices a physical difference instantly. And she's probably overcome with a little bit of shock, a little bit of excitement, and a little bit of fear, because she hasn't felt this way in so long. And at that same moment that she's healed, Jesus stops his walk of where he was going. And he pauses and he looks around and he asks this question. He says, who touched me? Now his disciples take a moment, just kind of sit back and kind of laugh at Jesus because of all the dozens of people that are immediately touching him at this very moment. But Jesus is not looking for those dozens of people. He's looking for one individual in particular. And he scans the crowd and he sees this woman and his eyes catch with her. And she knows that she's been found out. And she knows that maybe I've done something wrong. And so she falls on her knees and she begins to tell her story in front of all of these people. Because the sickness that she had made her unclean. She wasn't even supposed to be in a crowd of people. But now here she is, face to face with Jesus, knowing that she's been healed, and she begins to pour her story out in front of all of these people. Maybe some she knew, probably a lot she didn't know. And she sits there after she's through telling her story, and she waits for the worst. And Jesus looks at her. And he says to her, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. And so Jesus heals somebody else. And now this woman has an incredible story to tell. She's got a story of sickness to healing. She's got a story of seeking a cure in every single possible place that she could possibly find, and ultimately finding that cure only in Jesus Christ. She's got a story that's too good not to be told, and it will be told over and over and over again by her and by those who witnessed this particular event. Now, after this is over, Jesus continues on to the house that he was going toward, and it was toward the leader of the synagogue. His name was Jairus. Now, Jairus had a very important religious position. So the first question you have to ask yourself is, why is Jairus talking to Jesus at all? Because he was in a religious position at this point. And at this point, the religious leaders are doing everything they can to downplay Jesus' message. They're trying to get rid of Jesus. They don't like what he's doing. They don't like the uprising that he's causing, the hope that they're giving, the leadership that they're losing, and maybe some money that they're losing because all these crowds are following Jesus and they're asking him religious questions. They're not coming to them for religious information. And so they're trying to get rid of him. So why in the world would this Jairus guy be asking Jesus for any help at all? He's got a powerful position. And the answer to that question is this. When your daughter is sick and dying, you have a tendency to throw your ego to the side and do whatever in the world you might need to do in order to see your daughter's life saved. And that's exactly what he did. The Bible tells us that he had gone and he had fallen at the feet of Jesus and begged Jesus to come to his home to save his daughter's life. And Jesus had agreed. Now, as they're walking that way, Jesus is interrupted because somebody touched him, and he had to stop and deal with this woman. And by the time that he's done dealing with this woman, it was not good for Jairus' daughter. Because about the time that they're finishing up with this woman who had been sick, and they start walking again, some people come from Jairus' house and tell him, hey, look, it's too late, your daughter's already passed away. So come on to the house and let's deal with the mourning process. And also, don't bother Jesus anymore. There's no need to bother him. And Jesus overheard this conversation. And he looked at Jairus and he said, don't be afraid, just believe. And in the middle of his grief of what he's just been told, he's got this little bit of light. And so Jesus takes Jairus, and he takes Peter, and he takes James, and he takes John, and they go to Jairus' house. Now, when they get to Jairus' house, what they witness is all the emotions of a group of people having lost a child way too young. The Bible tells us that this child was 12 years old. And as all this mourning and wailing and screaming is taking place, Jesus walks into this situation and he simply asks this question. He says, why all the commotion and wailing? He said, this child is not dead, but asleep. And for a moment, you can just imagine that all the crying stopped. And it was kind of replaced with just silent disbelief. And then, very slowly, it's replaced with a little bit of laughter. And they're laughing at Jesus because they couldn't believe that this guy would make such a bold statement in the face of obvious death. And Jesus isn't bothered by it. He isn't bothered by their lack of faith. He just says, you know what? I need everybody outside. And he takes Jairus, Jairus' wife, he takes Peter, he takes James, and he takes John. And they go into the girl's room and they sit beside her on the bed. And the Bible says that Jesus took this little girl's hand and he said to her, little girl, I say to you, get up. And the Bible says that she immediately did just that. And everybody was astonished. And now Jairus and his family and this little girl have an incredible story to tell. That's Mark chapter 5 in a nutshell. Now, what I want to visit with you about this morning goes on to deal with their story. And the reason I want to deal with it, because I want you to think about the impact that each one of these stories could have had. There's something called a statistical effect. And the statistical effect of each of these three stories can be broken down into several categories. One of those categories is called the ripple effect. And it's the eyewitness effect. And in each miracle in Mark chapter 5 would likely have been witnessed by or heard by about a dozen to maybe 100 people, depending upon which miracle we're dealing with. Now, the possessed man, he would have been able to affect an entire Gentile area. He was in the region called the Decapolis, which is about 10 cities all kind of smashed together. And he became a traveling witness after his story had taken place. He became a traveling witness, and we find that in Mark 5, verse 20. That's what he did. Now, the woman who was sick, she was healed, again, in a very dense crowd, very populated area where Jesus was, and Jesus' interaction with her was incredibly public, and we see that in Mark chapter 5 and verse 30. And then you have the raising of Jairus' daughter, and that involved a very prominent individual within the Jewish community, and within the community as a whole. And so there's sociological studies that say that the testimony and influence for every dramatic story immediately reaches 7 to 10 people right off the bat. You're talking about direct witnesses, family, friends, all of these people who are a part of, who saw it happen or heard about it happen and seen the direct change of the individual's life that we're talking about. About 7 to 10 people. Those same sociological studies say that 3 to 5 times that number will hear this story within days in this little community that they're in. And then in that small, tight-knit community, the word of mouth could reach somewhere between 200 and 500 people per miracle. Now that's just kind of the start. That's just kind of the ripple effect of the miracles taking place at all, right? The stories haven't been created, and now they're being told. There's a second factor called the compounding credibility. And what that means is that multiple miracles in this one chapter create what's called a statistical amplification of belief. What I mean by that is if there's just one miracle, it could be kind of tossed aside as a coincidence, just kind of dismissed. But when you've got 3 varied, very powerful miracles that deal with the spiritual, the physical, and death-related, those 3 together statistically reduce doubt that could take place. So in probability terms, if there's a 50% belief rate after the first miracle, then what happens is after that first miracle, that second miracle and that third miracle compound upon each other. And you go from a 50% belief rate up to maybe a 70% belief rate or to a 90% belief rate. And so that's the way this kind of stuff works. And the third thing that happens here is what's called a faith growth multiplier. And this faith growth multiplier is this. If each healed person shared their stories with just 10 other people, and 1 in 3 listeners to that story believed. So, for instance, if the demon-possessed man who was healed went into the Decapolis and he shared his story with 100 people, and 30 people believed his story, and they began to tell other people, then what happens is you've got an effect, a faith growth multiplier effect of 3,000 plus people who have been affected by the story. With the woman, she again was healed very publicly in this crowd of people. It would have had an immediate impact. It would have had a long-term impact in her community. And so we're perhaps talking about maybe 100 to 300 people in her just immediate situation where people were influenced. And then with Jairus, because he carried such institutional weight in his area, he's potentially impacting hundreds within the religious circles of that day. Now, when you begin to combine the impact from each one of those stories, each one of those miracles that was done, what you get is probably an immediate influence of somewhere between 600 and 1,000 people immediately influenced. Direct eyewitnesses, family members, friends, 600 to 1,000 people that were directly influenced by those miracles. And then what you would have is what's called second generation testimony. Those people, those 600 to 1,000 people going and telling other people about what Jesus is doing, about how this demon-possessed man was healed, about how this woman who had been sick forever is healed, about this daughter who was dead for this religious leader, and now she's up playing outside like all the rest of the kids are. And so you have this incredible influence that's taking place, and the long-term effect over years would be tens of thousands of people influenced through that chain reaction. And you say, JJ, why are you telling us all this? That's a bunch of numbers. I feel like I'm sitting in a college math class. I'm sorry. I didn't like my college math class. I'm sure you didn't like it either. But here's why I'm telling you that particular story and those particular statistics. The question I'm asking you this morning is this. Are you telling your story? Please hear me when I say that each of us has a Jesus story. Every single person in this room has a Jesus story. Your Jesus story is maybe 40, 50, 60 years old. For some of you, your Jesus story is beginning this morning. But we have a Jesus story, and our story has a community of people that it needs to be shared with. And it needs to be shared with because our story has the ability to impact their lives and the lives of the people that they might tell. So what's keeping you from telling your story? And I say that because I know that some of you, your stories have the same theme as the demon-possessed man. You were captive to something, but you're not anymore. You're completely free of whatever it was. You lived a life of fear. You lived a life of depression, a life of isolation. But now you're experiencing peace in a way you've never experienced it before. And Christ has redeemed you and he's given you hope. That's your story's theme. It doesn't look exactly like the demon-possessed man. It doesn't look exactly like the other people who are going through the same theme in this room. Everybody's story is different and it carries power and it means something to the people that you will share it with. For some of you, your theme is like the woman who'd been suffering for a long time. You had a long-term illness. You were dealing with it for such a long time. Listen, I was listening to the Sunday school that met at 8 o'clock this morning. And before they ever got started, there were two people that were just sharing the stories about what they're dealing with from a particular illness. And it's been a long-term situation. It's not been something that was I'm down for 3 to 5 days, but I'll be fine. They're going through some stuff. And they were able to share their story about what they're going through with their Sunday school class. And their Sunday school class has the opportunity to pray for them and to walk with them as they're dealing with these things that you've maybe sought a cure. And you've gone to different doctors and tried different medicines and none of them worked. And so because none of them worked, maybe you found temporary relief in a substance. And that substance became an addiction to you. But you're free from that addiction now. You're free from that illness now. Because God's taken it away either through the medical world or just he did a miracle in your life and you're free from it and you have a story to tell. And some of you have a story that's just like Jairus. You somehow found hope even in the face of death. Maybe it was just your close encounter with death and you found hope in God because of the circumstances that brought you through it. Or maybe you're just dealing with somebody in your family who's passed away because God didn't heal them here, but he ultimately healed them eternally. And even in the face of that death situation, you have found hope in God through Jesus Christ. And you have a story to tell. And let me tell you this, your story is worth telling because it is your testimony to the power of God in your life. And it may be just the thing that someone else so desperately needs to hear to get them over the hump of whatever they're going through in their life. Your story. I was having a conversation with my physical therapist tech on Friday, and I've been going there for a little under a year now. It'll be a year come August or in September, and I've gotten to know the people there pretty well, and I see the same people and work with the same people over and over again every week. And I've developed a relationship, and I think the physical therapy tech is actually gonna be in our next service here this morning. She's driving all the way to the Woodlands to be in here in the next service, and I'm just hearing her talk and hearing her story and talking to her so much about different things. And she goes, one of the things she always tells me, she goes, I'm so private. And a lot of people are. She goes, I just don't like to tell my story to a lot of different people. And I said, I get that. I mean, that makes sense. There's a lot of people that aren't comfortable with their stories. They don't really know how to get their story and work it into a conversation somewhere. But for whatever reason, while she's torturing me physical therapy-wise, she has no problem talking to me about her story. Now, what's happening is that because this relationship is built in this particular scenario, she's grown comfortable enough with me to begin talking to me. And she's a 24-year-old physical therapy technician, and she's grown comfortable enough with me to begin to share her story with me. And I've got the opportunity to encourage her that her story is really a remarkable story. And I'm doing everything I can to get her to share that story with not only her family, but with the people that God's placed around her, because she's got an incredible story. She just needs to tell it. Your story is personal, but a personal story that is told publicly is powerful, and that story can change a life. I did some research, just a little bit more research, and then I'll let you go. I did some research. I said, if you took all those same statistics, those same variables that we looked at in the life of Mark chapter 5 and the stories of Mark chapter 5 and how they compounded upon each other and how they grew and how the outreach could have changed and people could have come to Christ because of their stories and because of their eyewitness accounts and all those different things. I said, what would it look like if we took all those same variables today And we took one person in this room and we got to hear their story today about how God had changed them and done something in their life. They got up here and they just said, here's my story, here's my testimony. And everybody in this room went out from here and they shared that story with 100 people or 10 people. And 3 people believed. I said it would, not including social media, because we know social media can explode in a hurry. But not including social media, it would take about 9 days to reach over 1,000 people in Montgomery, Texas. When you take one credible witness who shares the story, and you take the sharing rate and the credibility assumptions that we looked at a while ago, and you look at the generations that result with each person telling that story, over 1,000 people in just 9 days. You start factoring in some pictures and some video testimony on Facebook, and all of a sudden that increases pretty quickly. The number goes down. I say all that to say this morning. This church, North Shore, has an incredible story of where it started, how it got started, and where it is today. But more importantly than that, the story of North Shore is made up of every single individual in this room, who each have a story, who each have a testimony, who each have this relationship with Christ. And the great thing about North Shore Church is we don't sit in here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We meet in here twice. We meet in here on Wednesdays. I'm thinking that some of y'all don't know that yet. And we meet in here on Sundays, 9:30 and 11. We have small groups that meet in homes throughout the communities around the area. And we have the ability to leave here and to go and be a light and to share our story with a community that quite honestly is dying and lost. And they're looking for peace. They're looking for a break. They're looking for something powerful to happen in their lives because they have looked everywhere and they have tried everything and they're not finding it, but you found it in Jesus. You have the story and you have the ability to lead them to Christ. My encouragement to you this morning after reading Mark chapter 5, as I walked away from this, I said, I want our people to share their story. 3 incredible stories in this chapter alone tells us about the life of these people and how their lives were changed and what they did with that from that point forward. And all I can think about is that I've sat down with so many of you and I know your story and you've got a powerful story and it's just as good as any one of these. What's keeping you from sharing your story? We're not trying to build a church here. We're not trying to build a congregation here. What we're doing from this position at North Shore Church is we're trying to grow the kingdom of God. I don't care if we have 700 people in this room or 20 people in this room. If we can lead